let's talk about NATO. So some seismic moves being made across the pond. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. So President Erdogan of Turkey has lifted his hold on Finland and Sweden joining NATO. He announced that at the recent NATO summit in Spain that happened yesterday. So what he said is that he will be lifting his hold because Sweden and Finland lifted some restrictions on a Turkish group, on a Kurdish group, which he claims is a foreign terrorist organization. That's not for here right now of discussion. But anyway, that's all you need to know. He was the only person who was holding it up, and now he's allowing them in. And so NATO has formally extended an invitation to both Turkey and to Sweden and to Finland. Now it leaves it up to all of the NATO countries themselves in order to ratify the NATO treaty and allow their ascension, of which is very likely to happen without any debate whatsoever. Now, I actually do think the more noteworthy piece to me is not even that. It is the current expansion of the U.S. military footprint in Eastern Europe. People are not discussing this, but this is a seismic change. Let's put it up there on the screen. So President Biden, in his speech at NATO, here's what he said. We are going to establish a permanent military headquarters for the 5th Army Corps in Poland, one of the most forward deployed permanent army deployments of the United States all the way up near the Russian border. Number 2, maintain an additional rotational brigade of 3,000 troops in Romania, even more forward deployed than the troops who are in Poland, and then enhance rotational deployments to the Baltic states, obviously the most cutting edge of the NATO alliance. On top of that, sending more F-35 jet squadrons to the United Kingdom, additional air defense and other capabilities in Germany and in Italy, and then 2 new destroyers to the naval station in Spain. So a massive buildup of new military equipment and of military deployment, which is permanently deployed, not temporary, towards the Eastern European flank, right up against the Russians. Let's also throw this up there on the screen. Here's what they claim. Just so you know, they say, we now have many allies spending above NATO's benchmark of 2%, increasingly seen as a floor, not a ceiling, the White House says. 9 allies will be 2% this year. 19 have clear plans to meet it by 2024. 5 more have commitments to meet it later. So another way of reading that is that the vast majority of the people in NATO are not paying their 2% on defense, and that 5 of them think that we are such jokes that they don't even have to fake commit to a 2% defense spending. They're just like, yeah, for sure. We'll eventually we'll get there. And America's like, oh, cool. All right, we'll continue to blow out our military budget like 4% of GDP, and we'll put all these troops in your country and all these nuclear weapons and the umbrella and air defense, and don't worry about it. If you eventually get there, it's all good. Finland and Sweden, Sweden won't even commit actually to 2% in perpetuity. They also promise they'll get there. I'm sure they'll get NATO membership before that they do that. Finland is the same thing. And look, I just think in general, it's a seismic move. It is somewhat predictable given the invasion. I actually said this, I think, the day after. I was like, look, I was wrong. Putin would invade. Part of the reason I didn't think he would do it is because he's now united the entire West. And now he's basically guaranteed American and NATO troops on the eastern flank of NATO and all the way up to the Russian border, which is what he claimed that he didn't want. He's united and increased military budgets of the entire, he got the French to spend more money on the military. I mean, that's an impossible task. The Germans, also committing now to 2%. They were at 1.4, 1.6 for a long time. The UK spending more than they ever have. At a certain point, politically, this is a fait accompli. I hate to say it. I think we should have a much more robust debate, but I don't see any way that 67 people in the Senate, that there's less than, I don't see any way that there are less than 67 votes. Basically, every member of the Senate supports it. I do think we should have a debate. I'm like, hey, is this wise? Like, is this, could this trigger more problems with Russia? I actually think we should take a page out of the Turks' books. I'm not saying that their demands of Finland and Sweden were just, but they were like, hey, we have something that's important to us. So unless you give it to us, we're not gonna give you NATO membership. In the West, we're like, oh, we'll just give it to you, whatever you want. It's like, oh, I didn't know that Helsinki and Stockholm have a right to the US nuclear umbrella just whenever they request it and they ask for it. Like, there's no debate in our country.
It is.
Is it?
Thorough indictment of our political system and our media class that this is happening with next to no discussion. Next to no discussion. And, it's echoes of the way that NATO expansion has worked over decades, where this is done casually. There's next to no debate. the people who are out there warning that this could go badly are treated as cranks and, Kremlin apologists and all this stuff.
I'm sure they'll come at me for this.
Oh, yeah. Of course. But the reality is this is an extraordinarily significant development, not just the addition of Sweden and Finland, but also, as you point to, Bloomberg phrased this as this addition of troops and bases and all of this capacity to NATO. They say NATO returns to combat stance to counter a new and hostile world. This is the biggest upgrade of NATO's military presence in Europe since the end of the Cold War. And you just always have to ask yourself, how is Russia going to perceive that? How is Russia going to react to that? The more that we make this war an existential threat to Russia, the more dangerous we make the landscape and the more likely we make it that they use nukes. They, in their nuclear doctrine, say that it is justified to use nuclear weapons in the event of an existential threat to Russia.
Which they define.
Which they define
however they want.
Exactly. Every move that we are making here makes it more likely that they interpret the stakes of this war as an existential matter for Russia. And that is a potential disaster. And no one is talking about it. This was our fear from the beginning, that we're just sleepwalking through this thing. No one is really dealing with it seriously. No one's considering, okay, what might Russia do in response? And in fact, Russia is already warning, Putin warns NATO on moving military personnel and infrastructure to Finland and Sweden, saying they will respond in kind to any buildup in the Nordic nations. So I think that this is extraordinarily foolish and haphazard, what we're engaging in, with next to no debate. And it gets back to this bigger picture question of, the instinct, the sort of neoliberal instinct of, we'll just trust the experts. We're not going to actually delve into the details ourselves. I'm sure they're handling it. We're just going to accept we're being fed. They understand, we don't. No. We need the public to be deeply involved and deeply engaged in this debate, because ultimately you are the ones who are going to be most impacted by these decisions, and also by the, endless continuation of this war, which is having its own, impacts on us and on the world in terms of food prices and gas prices and all the rest. So it says everything about our political culture, how we are just sleepwalking into some, whatever you think of them, support or don't support, incredibly significant momentous decisions, no discussion.
I think people may have to make the case who support this, why American troops should die for the integrity of Helsinki and of Stockholm.
Yes.
And if you're Finnish and you're Swedish, listen, I get it. Like I said, it's beautiful, beautiful countries, all of that. However, we're talking about our resources and our blood. If I were you, I would do the same thing, but I'm not. We have to decide what's good for us. You and their advocates should make the case as to why it's in the strategic interests of the United States. So like I said, I'll present the counter argument, which I do think is a fair one, which is that any world where Russia is going to invade Finland and Sweden is going to involve the United States anyway, as we always get dragged into these European conflicts, like in World War I and in World War II. So we might as well just extend them the protection at the top. My response to that is very simple. I would rather get dragged into that kicking and screaming whenever it actually attacks our fundamental interests, rather than actually just go in automatically, which Article 5 would require us to do.
And the other question is whether this action makes that eventuality more likely.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because it's a provocation. It is a provocation. So from the beginning, the lack of debate, the lack of seriousness, the lack of discussion, it is extraordinarily troubling and really undermines our ability to actually function as a democracy when these decisions are just made and never taken to the American people whatsoever.
Well, it'll go to the Senate, and we'll cover it here. I want to see at least one say something on the floor, like, hey, does anyone want to make the case? Do we want to just sign ourselves up for an automatic trigger in order to go to war for the integrity of the most eastern part of Europe, of which we've never traditionally defended? Europeans, I know you're all mad at me, and we're airing our segment about this right now, but listen, I have to make this case very, very simply. Europe is 1/6 of global GDP, okay? It is a declining area of the world. It's mostly old people. Demographics, they have a problem. Innovation, they have some real issues. It's basically a welfare state whose best days are long behind them. Yes, we have cultural ties with Europe that go back a long time. However, I mean, whenever you're staking the future of your country militarily, the use of nuclear weapons, you should consider what those resources really mean. And if you think that Asia is the future, which I certainly do think it is, overtook Europe on GDP both in 2019, going forward, it will be our major trading relationship, and I believe our future rests far more there than over there. Well, you know, military resources actually are finite, and now we are deploying even more, both of an extension of commitment and of military resources on the European continent, which at the very least could be directed elsewhere, innovation, maybe even to our own domestic populace to shore up our domestic political problems. None of this, again, is of a consideration. None of it is being debated. This is probably the only dissenting view that is even out there, which is even in the same semi-mainstream. And I think that's a major indictment. I think the American people should have a say, as we had a say in World War I, as we had a say after World War I, and we also all had a say on the Marshall Plan, on, you know, that was a buy-in by America to say, you know what, we agree with this vision of the world. President Truman, Secretary of State Marshall, this is the world. Our boys fought and died for Europe, and so let's make sure that we rebuild it and reap the benefits going forward and protect democracy against the Iron Curtain. But nobody's making that case out there right now, and I personally think that we deserve much more of a say in this than is being given to all of us.
Yeah, indeed. And by the way, guys, Saagar and I did have a big old debate over Europe, so you can catch that over the weekend. So all right. To hear the pushback. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.